As American infrastructure developed, the idea of urban freeways became a major part. Large maps of possible highway routings through cities were drawn and built, cutting through neighborhoods across the country. Now, despite a change in opinion towards urban interstates, cities have massive maps of these concrete connectors, going from downtowns outwards to the suburbs and onwards, with one major form of these freeways being a beltway. A beltway is a route that forms a loop around a city or urban area and is fully connected in a ring form. This was normalized as a way to connect around the densest urban areas. But the idea has upgraded itself to a much larger scale as the outer barrier of a metropolitan area, forming an outer loop that stretches to be very long. So today I wanted to go over the longest instances of this that we see in the US and a bit of their histories. Before this video starts though, make sure you do subscribe. I make geography and city related videos like this every week, so if you enjoy the content and want to see more, subscribing is the best way to do that. It's super easy for you and it helps me out a ton. Thank you. So for the sake of today's list, we are only counting divided highways that have one singular designation. Some cities, like Philadelphia for example, could have long loops around their metropolitan area made up of several different routes and highways, but I don't want to count this because it makes the definition a lot less exact, which would make the video a lot more difficult to make. But without further ado, let's get into it with the 7 longest full beltways around cities, starting with the perimeter in Atlanta. So this is Interstate 285, which stretches around the Atlanta metropolitan area from the airport in the southwest to around the Tim Moreland Interchange, or Spaghetti Junction, in the northeast. At 62.9 miles long, the perimeter is an extremely important route for the city and honestly the entire country. Over 2 million people use the highway every day, making it one of the heaviest traveled roads in the US if you go by a per mile basis. Because of this, it's known for its extremely bad traffic, something we'll find on a lot of these highways. It's an old highway being proposed in 1952 with the creation of the interstate system. And construction started in 1958, again lining up with the start of the interstate system and being created at the same time as the other urban freeways in the 1950s and 60s. It was finished in 1969 with 4 total lanes between the 2 directions. This didn't last for long though, as the areas surrounding this highway continued to see heavy development, with more and more people needing to use the beltway. This resulted in much of its stretch being extended to 8 total lanes, under 10 years after it was initially completed. Since then, it's stayed mostly the same in terms of total length, but as I stated before, this wasn't anywhere near enough to stop the increase and now overwhelming traffic. One interesting quirk is that the state had plans for an over 200-mile outer loop around the entire North Georgia megaplex thingy, but the plans were dropped in favor of simply upgrading the rural roadways around the region. This 230-mile loop would have more than doubled any other in the country. Moving on to our 6th place beltway, we have the Capitol Beltway in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. This is another iconic ring road around a major metropolitan area, with many similarities to the perimeter in Atlanta. So I-495 is a 64-mile loop around the metro, traveling through Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. for a very short 0.1-mile stretch. It's another route with a very high travel volume, usually placing near the top of lists for highways with the worst traffic. It runs concurrent with I-95 for around half the route, a change that had to be made after freeway revolts stopped the original design through the downtown. The Capitol Beltway was designed into the original interstate system as well in 1951, though it had been an idea since 1944. It was built in the 50s and 60s, being opened in 1961 and finished in 64. Originally, this design was meant to serve as an easy bypass around the metro for people traveling up the eastern seaboard towards Baltimore. But the population explosion in the DC metro resulted in the highway being used more for local traffic, which is part of why the traffic volume is now so high. Moving on to our next beltway, we have the Charlotte Outer Loop in the Charlotte, North Carolina metropolitan area. This is a 66.7-mile interstate that encircles the city, entirely signed as Interstate 485. This is a newer beltway in a smaller metropolitan area than the first 2. But it still has very high traffic volumes and successfully serves the city's suburbs. The first portion was completed in the northeast corner in 1967, but the full outer belt wasn't even planned until 1975, with it being slowly completed in the following years with many different phases with their own price tags in the upper millions. The entire loop wasn't actually completed until 2010, with it being a slow project with different segments, as I said. Funnily enough, by this time there had already been several widening projects on the already completed portions of the highway. Any portion completed after 2003 was designed with a minimum of 6 travel lanes because of the extreme growth that was taking place within the metropolitan area. This seems to happen in every instance of these projects. You'd think they'd learn. Next up is I-435 in Kansas City, a highway encircling the metro in the states of Missouri and Kansas. This one requires a slightly looser meaning, since even though it's one route that creates a full circle around the metro at 83 total miles, this interchange in the northwest corner complicates things. You'd have to make a turn to stay on the beltway, meaning you can't just go in circles continuously in the left lane without taking an exit. I still define it as a beltway, but people in the city don't really see it this way, and it doesn't even have a cool, interesting name like the others. The highway was built in segments between 1965 and 1987, where the disconnected bits of freeway were finally connected to form the entire loop. Work took place on the highway between 2014 and 17 at the Kansas 10 and I-35 interchange, which became a much larger extended interchange when it was completed. Other than this, the highway has stayed strong as a vital connector for the city. Moving to the third longest beltway in the country, we have Interstate 275 in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. This is known as the Cincinnati Bypass, but I wouldn't think that that's like the main name or anything, which would instead be Staff Sergeant Matt Maupin Veterans Memorial Highway. Just kidding, that's only the portion in Clermont County, but anyways. This is the longest beltway in the interstate system, traveling 83.7 miles through 3 different states, with Ohio having the longest segment. This beltway brings us back to an older project, being approved in 1958 and being completed in Ohio in 1961. But things were complicated in Kentucky, mostly because of Indiana's very small portion that they weren't really on top of getting built. It was completed in Kentucky in 1979 and Indiana thereafter. Present day, the large circle encloses 250,000 acres and serves Cincinnati very well. Moving to the second longest beltway in the country, we move away from the interstate system, instead to the Sam Houston Tollway and Parkway in Houston, Texas. This is an 88-mile beltway around the city of Houston. This is a very simple route. It makes an almost square shape around the urban areas of the city, being the third beltway for the city. This being the third beltway is important because of the 2 inner loops, I-610 and the downtown loop. The concept for this third beltway wasn't created until after those. It was built around 1983 in different segments that were slowly built, having a quite complicated history when you think about the tolls and other construction costs. It uses the frontage road concept seen throughout Texas, having a fairly simple design that allowed it to be easily constructed. The route is 4 lanes in each direction for most of its length, going as far down as 2 on the Sam Houston Ship Channel Bridge. A complicated roadblock, or I guess water block, for the project's construction. Moving to our final beltway, the longest in the country, we have the Charles W. Anderson Loop, or State Highway Loop 1604, around San Antonio, Texas. This 95.6-mile route forms a full loop around the metro. Now, I'll stop right here. This one gets complicated. My definition was a divided highway that's signed as one route that makes a full loop. But this highway sadly does not achieve that. It's limited access for a lot of its route as it goes through the northern suburbs of San Antonio. But in the rural south, it has no requirement to be divided, and it goes down to 2 lanes. This means under my personal definition, it can't be on our list, despite its 95.6-mile length. Now, I have it here because I feel like the future could be bright. I'm not saying it'll ever be limited access, but San Antonio continues to grow, and eventually that'll seep into the south end of the metro and affect these segments traffic-wise. One day, it could absolutely be at least a divided highway, and it would then take the title for first place on this list. So there you have it. These beltways create important connections around metropolitan areas and play major roles in how cities' traffic patterns work. I still think as suburbs expand, we could see more being completed, like the Grand Parkway in Houston, which could one day form an uninterrupted loop and take the title. But until then, thanks for watching. Thank you to the members this week: Brock Sanders, Steve Priestman, SB Wilder, Florida Jake, Sir JC17, Alex Williams, Makita Martinoff, Kurt Ainsley, Jerome McCall, KMS162, JL, Bryson, Rosebud4, Darkbird, Big Pasty, Wolflake73, Snyder Swine, Benjamin Whitings, Ryan Devins, and Hazev the Wolf. Thank you all so much. Hazev the Wolf, Ryan Devins, Benjamin Whitings, all of these people are 25 months or more. So I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys if you're watching the channel. You've really helped me out over the past couple of years. So thank you very much.